There are moments in life you can't erase, no matter how much you wish you could. For me, it started with something so unexpected, so absurd, that I still can't believe it happened. You know those moments when your life spirals out of control because of one mistake? For me, it started with my father-in-law, and something I can't unsee. His 13-inch banana, yes, I said that. It drove me to the edge of insanity. It wasn't a scandal I heard about or something I read, it was real. It was my life. And that moment, that one sight, was the beginning of everything I'd lose. This is my story of betrayal, temptation, and consequences I'll regret forever. My name is Lily. I'm 28 years old, and I've been married to Tom for 3 years. We had what I thought was a perfect life. Tom was everything I could have asked for in a husband, kind, loving, and always there when I needed him. Our life together was peaceful, predictable, and comfortable. We lived in a small apartment, just the two of us, and I honestly couldn't have asked for more. But things started to change when Tom's job began demanding more of his time. Long hours, weekend shifts, late-night meetings, it seemed like I was spending more time with the empty spaces in our home than with him. At first, I didn't mind too much. I kept busy with my own work, and I understood that he was trying to provide for us. But as the months passed, I started to feel more and more isolated. I missed the intimacy we once shared, the little moments that made us feel close. That's when Tom suggested we move in with his parents. At first, I wasn't thrilled by the idea. I had always liked my space, and the thought of living with his parents felt like a huge change. But Tom promised it would be temporary, just until we could save some money and get back on our feet. And truthfully, I thought it might help us reconnect. So, we packed up our things and moved into their home. At first, it wasn't as bad as I expected. His parents, Henry and Martha, were kind, welcoming, and tried their best to make us feel comfortable. They had a big house, plenty of space, and I figured it would be a good opportunity to spend more time with Tom's family. But then there was Henry. Tom's father. He was nothing like what I expected. At 58, he had a presence that commanded attention. He wasn't just older, he was magnetic. Confident, self-assured, and with a charm that seemed to draw people in. He had this way of making you feel like the most important person in the room, like everything you said mattered. He wasn't like other older men I'd met. He didn't have that tired, worn-down look you'd expect from someone his age. Instead, he had this vitality, a fire that never seemed to fade. He carried himself with such ease, and his words were always measured, always knowing. He would compliment me in ways that made me feel seen, but not in a way that was inappropriate. At least, that's what I told myself at first. I'd catch him looking at me sometimes, and it was always just a little too long. A smile that lingered a second too long, a glance that made my heart skip a beat. But I brushed it off. He was my father-in-law, after all. But as the days went by, I started to notice more. He'd always find a reason to talk to me, to check in on me when Tom was busy. He'd bring me coffee in the mornings, ask how my day was going, and listen intently as if my thoughts mattered more than anything else. It felt nice, comforting even. But it also felt off. Like something I couldn't quite place. I remember one night, after Tom had gone to bed early, Henry and I stayed up talking in the living room. We were discussing everything from politics to family memories, but there was this undeniable tension in the air. He was leaning in just a little too close, his hand brushing against mine as he passed me a drink. It was subtle, but it sent a shiver down my spine. I tried to ignore it, telling myself I was just being paranoid. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing. That the relationship I had with Tom's father was shifting into something more dangerous. At the time, I didn't know how to handle it. I wasn't sure if I was imagining things or if he was really sending signals I wasn't ready to acknowledge. But I couldn't deny the way my heart would race whenever he was near, or how I'd catch myself thinking about him when I shouldn't have been. This wasn't just the harmless attention of a father-in-law who was trying to make me feel welcome. This was something else. Something I wasn't prepared for, something I didn't know how to resist. It happened on a Sunday morning. I was in the kitchen, preparing coffee, the smell of freshly ground beans filling the air. The steam from the hot water curled up and disappeared into the morning light streaming through the window. I was lost in the quiet rhythm of the morning, just me, the coffee, and the peaceful silence of the house. That's when I heard the creak of the floorboards behind me. I turned, expecting to see Tom, but instead, it was Henry. He stood in the doorway, wearing nothing but a towel wrapped loosely around his waist. My heart stopped. I tried to look away, but my body betrayed me. My eyes lingered, and for a brief moment, I couldn't look anywhere else. The towel barely covered him, and the sight of his bare chest, his broad shoulders, the way his muscles tensed as he moved, made my pulse race. I felt a heat rise in my cheeks, but it wasn't just embarrassment. It was something else. Something I couldn't explain. Henry didn't seem to notice the way my gaze faltered. He smiled, that same, confident smile, and walked past me to the fridge. His presence filled the room, making the air feel thick, heavy. Every step he took seemed to echo in my chest. I tried to focus on the coffee, to remind myself that this was just a normal morning, that I was overreacting. But I couldn't shake the image of him standing there, so close, so exposed. He reached for the milk, his back to me now, and I could see the muscles in his back flex as he bent slightly. I felt a knot in my stomach, a strange mix of guilt and desire that I couldn't push away. I knew I shouldn't be feeling this way. I knew it was wrong. But I couldn't stop my mind from wandering. The silence stretched on, and for a moment, it felt like time had frozen. I wanted to say something, anything to break the tension, but the words stuck in my throat. I was ashamed, but at the same time, I couldn't forget what I'd just seen. Henry turned back to me, his eyes locking with mine. The smile on his face hadn't changed, but there was something else there now. Something that made my heart race even faster. He didn't say anything. He just nodded, as if everything was perfectly normal. As the days passed, I found myself noticing Henry more and more. It wasn't just his presence that was hard to ignore, it was the way he saw me. Every time we crossed paths, he seemed to look at me with this knowing gaze, like he could read me in a way no one else could. Tom had always been a good husband, but lately, he was distant. I didn't blame him, his work was demanding, and he was trying his best to provide for us. But there was something about Henry's attention that made me feel alive. One afternoon, I was in the living room reading a book when Henry walked in. He paused, his eyes scanning me for a moment, before he smiled. "You look stunning today, Lily," he said, his voice low and sincere. The words lingered in the air, and I felt a rush of heat flood my cheeks. Tom had never complimented me like that. Not in so long. I smiled back, trying to brush it off. "Thanks, Henry. You're too kind." But deep down, I knew it wasn't just kindness. It was something else. Something more intimate. And I hated how much I liked it. It wasn't just the compliments, though. It was the way he made me feel seen, truly seen. When he spoke to me, it wasn't just small talk. He asked about my day, about my thoughts, about what was important to me. Tom used to do that, but lately, he seemed distracted. One evening, Tom was working late again, and Henry and I were sitting together in the living room, watching TV. The house was quiet, and the tension between us felt almost tangible. Henry sat beside me on the couch, close enough that our legs brushed. I felt a jolt of electricity shoot through me, but I didn't pull away. He leaned in slightly, his voice soft, almost a whisper. "You're so much more than just Tom's wife, Lily." His hand brushed against mine, just the slightest touch, but it sent a wave of warmth through my entire body. I should have pulled away. I should have stood up and walked out of the room. But I didn't. I just sat there, frozen, as his hand lingered next to mine. And for the first time in a long while, I felt wanted. Why didn't I stop this? I asked myself, my mind racing. Why didn't I pull away? But the truth was, I didn't want to stop. I didn't want to stop the way his touch made me feel, or the way his attention made me feel like I mattered. I didn't want to stop the way my heart raced when he was near. And that's when I knew I was in trouble. Deep trouble. The lines between right and wrong were starting to blur, and I didn't know how to stop myself from crossing them. That night, when Tom was out, everything felt different. The house was quiet, too quiet. It was as if the walls were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. I was in our bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the door. I knew Henry was downstairs, probably watching TV or reading, but in that moment, it felt like the whole world was closing in around me. I kept thinking about all the times we had crossed paths, all the stolen moments, the lingering touches, the words that felt too intimate for a father-in-law. I couldn't shake the way my body responded to him, how every glance seemed to pull me deeper into something I knew I shouldn't want. And then, just as I had been dreading, I heard the soft knock on the door. My heart skipped a beat. I stood up, my legs unsteady, and walked toward the door. I opened it slowly, almost hesitantly, and there he was, Henry, standing in the hallway, his eyes dark with something I couldn't ignore. His gaze locked onto mine, and in that moment, there was no going back. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The silence between us was enough to say everything. He stepped forward, closing the distance between us. His hand brushed against my cheek, and my breath caught in my throat. I should have stopped him. I should have told him to leave, told him that this was wrong, that I was married, that I couldn't do this. But I didn't. Instead, I felt the pull of desire, the overwhelming need to be touched, to feel wanted in a way I hadn't in so long. His lips were on mine before I could even think, and for a moment, I forgot everything. I forgot the guilt, the shame, the consequences. I kissed him back. The thrill of it was intoxicating. My heart raced, my body responded to him in ways I couldn't control. But underneath it all, there was a gnawing feeling of guilt, a voice in the back of my mind screaming at me to stop. But it was too late. Henry's hands were on me, pulling me closer, and I couldn't bring myself to push him away. Every touch, every kiss, felt like a forbidden secret, a thrilling escape from the loneliness I had been feeling for so long. And in that moment, as his hands moved over my body, I knew I had crossed a line I could never uncross. I had given in to the temptation I had been fighting for so long, and I couldn't take it back. The guilt hit me like a wave, crashing over me, but it was drowned out by the thrill, the rush of doing something so wrong, yet so desperately desired. I knew this would change everything. But in that moment, all I could think about was the way he made me feel, alive, wanted, and completely lost in the moment. After that night, which I enjoyed so much, I felt alive and desired. We continued this affair for months. His wife, my mother-in-law, was a doctor and rarely at home, and Tom was always busy with work. So, we usually found time to be intimate during the night or in the day when we were home alone. It always felt good. The thrill of the secrecy, the rush of being with him when I knew I shouldn't be, it was addictive. Every stolen moment, every touch, every kiss was like a drug I couldn't stop craving. And as much as I hated myself for it, I couldn't bring myself to walk away. It all came crashing down one evening when I least expected it. I thought I had been careful, that I had covered my tracks well enough. But I made one fatal mistake, one text message I thought I'd deleted. It was a simple message from Henry, just a few words, but it was enough. Enough for Tom to find it when he grabbed my phone to check something. I didn't even hear him come in. When he saw the message, everything changed. The color drained from his face, and for a moment, he just stared at the screen in silence. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew, in that instant, that everything was about to unravel. "What is this, Lily?" Tom's voice was barely above a whisper, but it felt like it echoed through the entire house. I opened my mouth to speak, to explain, but no words came out. I was paralyzed with guilt and fear. The weight of what I had done pressed down on me, and I couldn't escape it. Tom's eyes filled with disbelief, and then, rage. His hand shook as he tossed the phone on the table. "How long, Lily? How long has this been going on?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. The truth was there, in the air between us, thick and suffocating. How could you? His voice cracked, and I saw the pain in his eyes, the pain I had caused. The pain I couldn't undo, and then, as if the storm had just begun, Henry walked into the room. He must have heard the commotion. He stood in the doorway, his face pale, his eyes wide. The tension in the room was suffocating. Tom didn't waste a second. He stormed toward him, his fists clenched. "You," he didn't even finish the sentence before he lunged at Henry, pushing him against the wall. I stood there, frozen, my heart breaking as I watched the two men I loved, one my husband, the other my father-in-law, face each other in fury. The house exploded into chaos. "You've ruined everything!" Tom shouted, his voice filled with betrayal. "You've destroyed my family." I could barely breathe. I wanted to apologize, to beg for forgiveness, but the words wouldn't come. I couldn't fix what I had broken. Henry didn't fight back. He just stood there, looking at me with a mix of guilt and regret. But it was too late for apologies. The damage had already been done. The rest of the night was a blur. Tom stormed out, and I was left standing there, alone, with the weight of my choices crashing down on me. The family I had once known, the life I had built, was falling apart. I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know how to make it right. All I knew was that I had crossed a line, and now I had to face the consequences. And the consequences were far more painful than I ever could have imagined. I lost everything because of a moment of weakness. My marriage, my home, and my peace of mind, all gone. The man I loved, the family I thought I had, it all slipped through my fingers in a matter of months. And now, all I'm left with is regret. If I could turn back time, I would. I would take back every moment of weakness, every decision that led me down this path. But I can't. The damage is done. The trust once shattered, the pain I caused. It's irreversible. Tom and I are no longer together. The house is empty, the silence louder than any argument we ever had. My relationship with Henry is over, and I haven't spoken to him since that night. The family I once knew, the life I once had, is a distant memory. I've learned the hard way that temptation can ruin everything. It can destroy what you hold most dear in an instant. And the worst part is, you don't always see it coming. You don't realize how deep you're in until it's too late. I'm sharing my story, not for sympathy, but as a warning. If you're ever tempted, if you ever find yourself on the edge, think twice. The consequences of giving in are far greater than the fleeting thrill. I would give anything to undo what I've done, but I can't. So, all I can do is hope that my story will serve as a lesson. Don't let temptation ruin your life. Don't let it take away everything you've worked for, everything you love. I'll live with the consequences of my actions for the rest of my life. But I hope, for your sake, you never have to. Have you ever faced temptation that tested your limits? Have you ever found yourself in a situation where one wrong choice changed everything? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your experiences in the comments below. And if you want more stories like this, stories that explore the complexity of relationships, choices, and the consequences of our actions, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you for listening to my story. I'll see you in the next one.